With Thanksgiving in the books, week 1 of the NFL season is now finished, and we are ready to start talking about who the favorites are to make it all the way. With the NFL Power Rankings, I'm George. Eric is alongside. Let's start at the bottom, as we always do. 32 through 21. Huge surprises here. The Raiders, the Cardinals, the Giants, and the Jets are all bad.
Yeah, and as it would have it, the Raiders actually 32 in our power rankings, but actually have they're basically underdogs to get the number 1 pick, having had lost to Arizona here. So they're seemingly tanking, but not doing it well enough to possibly get the number 1 pick. So that's certainly an interesting dynamic. They've been more efficient than they appear, but they continue to make mistakes, like sort of when it counts on third down and via turnovers and things like that. So pretty disappointing year for the Raiders.
Let's not mince words here. The team that is doing the best job on this bottom end of the bracket, the other team in the Bay Area, the San Francisco 49ers, who currently have the inside track at the first round pick and will probably trade that over to the Raiders for everything. The whole kit and caboodle, except for John Gruden. We'll let him stay there. Okay, let's actually look at some positively trending things on this bottom end of the bracket, and that starts with the Cleveland Browns, who absolutely destroyed the Cincinnati Bengals this past week and improved the most of any team in our ELO rankings. Do they have a chance to creep even higher up?
Yeah, I think so. They play Houston this week. Houston's a team that is good on the sort of like standings, but not necessarily good with respect to the data. Baker Mayfield's been terrific this year. He's been upper half of the league in terms of PFF grade. He's generating a positively graded throw on over a quarter of his passes, 6.4% big time throw rate. He's been terrific. I think, as we've seen the last couple weeks, that the Browns supporting cast starts to improve. You're starting to see Baker's numbers sort of go through the roof. So I think they can compete with almost anybody right now moving forward. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them kind of in the middle of the pack as the season ends.
Yeah, the game against Houston is interesting because there's probably a greater chance that the Browns actually pull this one off than maybe most would think just by looking at the record. Baker has the ability to take those games that maybe they shouldn't be favored in, but to add some variance, to throw the ball deep with accuracy. He's number 1 in accuracy rate in terms of ball location on throws 20 or more yards downfield. So they've got the ingredients needed to put it together and to move up into the top 20. And speaking of the top 20, the Denver Broncos at 20, all the way up to the Dallas Cowboys at 11. Let's start with some teams that are falling back every week, seemingly. The Falcons, the Titans. When the season is all said and done, are they even in this middle group anymore?
Yeah, the Titans, I think, are the most enigmatic team in the NFL. They start 3-1, they fall to, I believe, 3-4. Then they go to 6-4. Then they fall back here. So to me, I just think that team last season at 9-7 was fundamentally weaker than being 9-7. We thought that they would improve this year, but possibly have a weaker record. I think that's what you're seeing. I think on the field, Marcus Mariota has played particularly well at times. Corey Davis has played well. Their defense has had some bright spots despite not being able to cover very well. But whether it be poor coaching decisions or just simply variance, they're probably not going to end up with a winning record as they had the last 2 seasons. So I think at 17 is probably where they end up sitting at the end of the year.
Looking at the top half there, an interesting little flip-flop here. Frank Reich goes to the Colts. The Colts currently ahead of the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that he left, the defending Super Bowl champion, in our power rankings at the moment. And as bad as the Eagles' defense has been, the Colts' defense isn't great. This is a direct reflection of the offense that the Colts have now, which is really powerful and can beat just about anyone on any given day. So we look at this top 5 in terms of this middle pack, right? You've got Philly, Indy, Carolina, Houston, and Dallas. Going into next week, which one of those teams has the best chance to jump into the top 10?
Yeah, I would say, if Dallas were to beat New Orleans or play a strong game, they obviously would have, a spot in the top 10, I would say. I don't think that necessarily happens. So you're probably looking at an Indianapolis team going on the road, going to face Jacksonville. Jacksonville, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. I think Indianapolis probably rolls over Jacksonville here, and as such would end up being 7-5 after starting the year 1-5. And they're really in the conversation right now. We actually have them favored to end up in the playoffs as the 6th seed in the AFC. I think that, if Houston were to falter against Cleveland, they will be in the conversation for the AFC South title altogether.
Yeah, I want to be there with you, but I'm going to actually show the Texans a little bit of love here. They are a good team. Deshaun Watson's playing better than he did last year. They beat the Browns in most situations, they vault up into the top 10 just barely if one of these teams does going into next week. Before we get into the top 10, if you want to leverage any of the information you get here to make a little cash, you want to head to MyBookie.ag. Whether it's futures in the NFL or a random game on a Tuesday night in the MAC, they've got you covered. They can make any sporting event more exciting. Head to MyBookie.ag, and in just 10 seconds, you can have a bet down on anything you could possibly imagine. Plus, they have in-game live betting, so if you get bored during the game, they make it more exciting that way as well. Use promo code PFF to get a dollar-for-dollar match on your first deposit. It is simple. PFF plus MyBookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. All right, the top 10. Again, some segmentation going on in the NFL, but I would venture to say this. The top 3 are on a different level. It was the top 4 for a while. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would absolutely. And then I think from there, there's another 4 that I think are better than probably 8 through 10 as well, with Chicago probably distancing itself from Minnesota. But yeah, New England I think is a little bit away from Kansas City. They did cover against the New York Jets, but it wasn't that like sort of patriot and like sort of game that we normally see. Patriotic game that we normally see. Yeah, I do agree. I think New Orleans, Los Angeles, clear favorites in the NFC, and until Kansas City falters against a team that's not one of the best teams in the NFL, I think they have to be considered the favorite in the AFC by a wide margin.
At some point here, we're going to see Minnesota and Seattle play each other. That game will likely have a big impact on the NFC wild card, but it's interesting to note here, Seattle creeps up now into the top 10, a team that people were writing off left and right before the season, without Russell Wilson, the worst team in the NFL, yada, yada, yada. Here they are in a situation where in week 2, they went into Chicago and looked lost, might be putting it nicely. And now here they are just a few spots behind Chicago. If that game were to happen again tomorrow, probably a very different game at the very least. So it's nice to see how these things can change as the season goes on. Let's talk now about the top 5 or top 6. We've got Pittsburgh and the former San Diego, Los Angeles Chargers. In 6 and 5 right now, they play on Sunday night. Likely outcome here. If one of those teams win, would you put them ahead of New England into that top 4?
Yeah, I would have to look at how convincing it ends up being. New England gets to play Minnesota this week. I think Minnesota is a good enough team that if you have a convincing win there, it vaults you a little bit. But let's say New England has kind of an average effort, even in a victory against Minnesota. I do think that whoever convincingly wins the Pittsburgh-Los Angeles game ends up being in the conversation for the top 4 in the NFL. And this doesn't really have much implication in terms of the AFC playoff picture. One team's going to win a division, one team's going to be a wild card. But I do think what it does help us do is sort of set the stage for is one of these teams actually in that conversation with the top, Kansas City, New England, to actually compete for the Super Bowl berth out of the AFC. Despite
the loss of Melvin Gordon, which I know is very big and just utterly impossible for the Chargers to overcome that, I'm going to go ahead and say they do. And if they beat the Steelers on Sunday night, in my opinion, they should be in the top 4. That would be a very impressive win to go into Pittsburgh and win that game. I think the Chargers have the talent, certainly, to be up there in the top 4, and now the proof would sort of be in the pudding. Let's go to the top 3. Chiefs, Rams, Saints. Is one of those teams head and shoulders above the rest, or is it just flip a coin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think New Orleans, we have New Orleans at about a 29% chance to win the Super Bowl. That has really jumped over the last few weeks. We see New Orleans not only playing, obviously, inspired offensive football, kind of trolling Atlanta by throwing the ball to a bunch of no-names on Thursday night, but what we've seen is their defense has been able to force turnovers, which I think is actually more important in today's NFL, even if as random as it can be. They're forcing turnovers, they're getting pressure on the quarterback, and they're not a disaster covering on the back end. If their defense can play anywhere near on par with Los Angeles, what they end up having is that home field advantage throughout the playoffs should they finish with the same record or better. And I think home field advantage for New Orleans in the playoffs is worth quite a bit. So we think New Orleans is probably quite a bit better in terms of Super Bowl odds than the Rams and the Chiefs here, and that's the reason why.
Disagree. But that's okay. The season is only 1 week old.
How do you disagree with the numbers?
Because the season is 1 week old and things will change, as I just illustrated. They already have for many of these teams here. Don't worry. At the end of the season, Sean McVay, Jared Goff, they'll rise to the top. I have confidence. But right now, this is how it stands, and that's the beauty of the NFL. You get to watch the games and see how things change. Right now, certainly the Saints deserve to be in the #1 spot. But looking forward, I'm going to go ahead and stake my claim here. It's no fun to be a front runner.
It is good to see. It is good to see surprises once January comes. But for now, a big surprise would be a team other than New Orleans or the Rams making out of the NFC.
This is a fact. For more, head to ProFootballFocus.com, subscribe to the PFF forecast, and of course, head to MyBookie.ag.